أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the first review session for Denial, a class taught by Sheikh Yasir Qadi with the Al-Maghrib Institute. This class is the tafsir of Surah Rahman and Yasin, and inshallah we begin our first review session with Surah Yasin. On the slide you should be able to see the four names that the Sahaba generally referred to Surah Yasin with. As you read through these, I would like to quickly remind you that this surah, by almost unanimous consensus, was revealed in Mecca. And this is probably the middle Meccan period. That is what Sheikh Yasir told us. And it has some of the common characteristics of the Meccan period, which include short verses and having a lot of rhythm and rhyme. And as we know that the Makki surahs mostly do not have laws in them, and the emphasis is on Tawheed and Risala and Akhirah. And that is the case with Surah Yasin as well. If we were, Sheikh Yasir talked about this, that if we were to say that Surah Yasin had a theme, then that central theme would be to prove that resurrection was going to take place. But of course, Sheikh Yasir also explained that we don't want to say that a surah has a theme, because every surah has many things that it is covering, but essentially the theme of resurrection is dominant in Surah Yasin. Some of the blessings of Surah Yasin include, and there are several of them, you should be able to find them in your notes, but one of them I'm going to speak about over here is it is a hadith where the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Al-Baqarah is the pinnacle of the Quran, and Ayatul Kursi has been taken from under the throne of Allah, and Yasin is the heart of the Quran. No one reads it for the sake of Allah except that his sins are forgiven, so read it over your dead. This is from the Sunan of Abu Dawood. This hadith is interesting to remember because it talks about reading it over your dead. And what this means is that, and there was an incident as well explained in class where when Udayf ibn Harith was on his deathbed, he asked, does anyone know Surah Yasin? And a young man said he knew it, and Udayf asked him to recite it over me. And the young man by the name of Saleh began reciting it. And when he reached the 40th ayah, Udayf breathed his last and he passed away. So we do have an incident where, since Udayf was a Sahabi, we do have an incident where he asked Surah Yasin to be recited when he was on his deathbed. So we know that there is no problem with having recite Surah Yasin to someone who's on their deathbed. Inshallah, moving on to the surah itself, we do look through your notes and make sure you go through the incidents. There are about 4 or 5 of them in our notes that talk about why possibly Surah Yasin was revealed. And so look through those as well, as those stories are important, especially for the exam. So moving on to the ayat, of course, we know that Yasin is, these are basically huruful muqatta'at, and this is from in the Quran we have broken letters, and basically there are a lot of reasoning for it, and again there's a whole rationale for it, and there's a whole discussion for it. We scholars have differed over how to understand these scattered letters. I believe there were 15 opinions about them, so you can look through those in the notes, but the point being that this is how this surah begins. And one of the things that I do want to point out is that of course Allah knows best what the strongest opinions are, but Imam Malik was asked about the permissibility of naming someone Yasin, and Imam Malik said that this should not be done because it will not be appropriate and it will not be dignified. So moving on to the next ayah, by the Quran full of wisdom, wal Quran al-Hakim. The ayah begins with an oath, and the idea of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beginning with an oath, and basically this is translated as I swear by the Quran. which is Al-Hakim, the point of the oath is to emphasize. Now, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need to emphasize because we should already be paying attention to him. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing something in the Quran, the point is to make you sit up and take notice and to pay attention. And Al-Hakim, of course, is comes from the word hikmah, which means full of wisdom, and it is basically not used for inanimate and dead objects. It is used to describe living entities. So basically the reference here that is that the Quran is a life-giving entity, and it is worthy of a description besides something inanimate. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pretty explicit in the fact that the Quran is a life-giving spirit. He even refers to the Quran as the ruh in some places. Moving on to the next ayat, we have innaka laminal mursaleen. Something to note here is that in the Quran, throughout the Quran, truth is singular and falsehood is plural. So that is something to remember as we go through these ayat. So these two ayat, Inna qala min al-mursaleen and ala siratul mustaqim, are two separate sentences. One of them translates as, you are the messenger of Allah, you are on the straight path. So basically we can join these two together and say that you are the one who has been sent to those who are on the straight path. Both of these meanings are basically valid and they complement one another. Moving on to ayah number 5, the Tanzil is basically one of the common names of the Quran. There are 5 common names of the Quran, and I believe obviously one of them is the Quran. Then there is Kitab, there is Dhikr, and there is Tanzil. Quran and Kitab are two most common ones, and they are kind of complementary. The reference to Tanzil is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent it down. Now the reason the word Nazala is not used, because Nazala means that the Quran came down all at once, and so the Tanzil is basically, Anzala means that Allah revealed the Quran bit by bit, and that's where Tanzil comes from. And this is something that is very unique about the Quran that we need to remember. That was not the case with the Torah or the Injil or the Zabur. They all came down in one go, fully, completely. Whereas the Quran is the only book that came down in parts throughout. And then ayah number 6 continues that conversation. Do remember that the primary audience at the time was the Quraysh, and one of the things that we learned in class was that the Quraysh did not have a prophet, and the question that was raised in class was that the Quraysh did have a prophet, because Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam were sent to them thousands of years ago. But essentially, because such a huge chunk of time had passed between the coming of Ibrahim and Ismail, that everyone had forgotten the memories of prophethood, and this is why the Quraysh were being referred to as the people who did not have a prophet, and they were being they were basically being told that they are ghafil, they're heedless. And the point of ghafil, it means, is that they're unaware. The reason is that it is not meant to insult the Quraysh or to bring their ignorance in front of them, but the idea was that it was meant to correct them. So the point was that it would make them listen by pointing out their weakness, that they did not have a prophet, and then this is the reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sending Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to this community that did not have a prophet, and that was ghafil, and that was basically unaware. That is the first 6 ayats of Surah Yasin. Inshallah, we will be moving a little faster in the next reviews. Please look through your notes, because I am just pointing out a few things, and there are a few more things on the slides, but the notes are really what are going to help you pass through the exam. So the exam is on Sunday, March 4th, online at www.almaghrib.org. It will be available between 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Inshallah, until the next session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.